Okay, here we are starting to sew our project. So I have my IQ turned on. The first thing I'm going to do is touch design sew quilt, edit sew existing, and I'm looking for my project. Project complete, this one. This is going to be my guide. Continue. Now IQ's asking me to touch a reference point, and now I have the quilt on the machine. I need to align my project plan with my quilt, but I'm not going to align the center of this quilt with the center of my real quilt. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work with my plan off to the side. It'll be easier that way, less confusing, and I can copy the patterns and move them onto the real quilt as needed. So, touch a reference point on the screen. I'm going to touch the top right corner. Continue. Move the needle to the reference point and touch OK. I'm going to move my machine over to the left-hand side of the real quilt. Doesn't matter where, just off the real quilt. Okay? Touch OK. So now I'll move my machine back to the center so the camera can focus in on it. So I've aligned my real quilt with my quilt project map. So the first thing I'm going to do on this real quilt is stitch the top border. I'm only going to stitch the feathers. I'm not going to stitch the hearts. I'm going to wait and stitch those at the end. For this small project, we're actually going to turn the quilt rather than stitch the side borders as we go. So I'm going to do the hearts as a final step when I stitch the side borders. Right, so we're just going to stitch the feathers on the top. So the first thing I have to do is actually mark the block on my real quilt. So we'll go add edit block, add block, standard block, mark on quilt. My motors are lifting because I don't like that bit of resistance. I like them to be lifted. So it says move the needle to the first point of the block and touch OK. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go along the seam line at the edge of the border, between the border and the sashing, and I'm going to move along the edge of the outside of the quilt. And when I get to the corners, I'm going to mark a diagonal across the corner. So I will start here, and I'm going to lower my needle so that I'm as accurate as I can be. Alright, okay, and any time I think that that seam line isn't quite straight, I will mark another point. Doesn't matter how many you mark, just make sure to really pay attention to the seam line and mark it as accurately as possible. I may come in front of the camera. Little bend in my seam there. Okay, I'm at the corner, and now I'm going to go diagonally out to the corner of the border. And I'm going right to the raw edge. And I'm going to come along. I don't worry about being so accurate out here because I'm remembering that our pattern doesn't actually go out to the edge. So I'm just doing it roughly. I do want to mark the corner accurately though, and I will come back into that inner corner seam, and I'm finished. Do you want to add another block? No. You may or may not get that pop-up window. Okay, so let's go zoom full. I'll come over to the center and bring the machine forward so that you can see how I'm going to place the pattern. I'm going to go zoom full at this point. Turn the zoom off. Here's my quilt project map. Here's the real first border up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the patterns from my quilt map and move them over to the real block. I'm only copying them because I don't want to lose them here. If I moved them, they'd be gone from here. I want to keep this intact. So I'm going to go add edit pattern, copy patterns, select the patterns to copy, and I'm going to copy the 2 feather patterns, remembering it starts in the center and it stitches out. Continue, and I'm moving that copy over here. Now at this point I'm going to zoom in. Alright, let's move the copy. This is the center of the pattern, this is the center of my border block, so I'm just going to snap those together. Remember, though, you know, when we drew up the plan, we found that the center of the pattern wasn't really the center. It didn't match nicely, it didn't sit nicely in the border. So I have to bring that border pattern down. So I'm going to move it by using my down arrow. Okay, now that looks good, but I'm going to go into true size, touch this end. Okay, I'm going to use pan. And I can immediately see that it's crossing over that diagonal line. Remember, we don't want it to cross over that diagonal line. But I'm also remembering I want this pattern to be about 1/4 inch away from the seam. So I can either turn on my grid. Of course, my border block won't be perfect. So instead of using the grid, I'm going to use measure. I'm going to touch measure tool. I'm going to bring that in. Come on, measure. Doesn't want it. There we go. Sometimes hard to grab that. And we're bringing that in, and I'm putting it there on my pattern, and I'm bringing this in. Measure, come on. Doesn't want to play nice. Let's zoom in some more. Maybe it'll work better this way. Let's try. I can grab it. Sometimes it. Oh, there we go. Got it. Sometimes takes a couple of tries to grab that end. And I can see that's 0.30, that's virtually 1/4 inch. But I'm actually going to bring down my pattern a little bit more. Not measure, I want to move the pattern, not the measure. Okay, let's see if we can make the measure work again. Here we go. Bring it up. Grab this end. There we go. Didn't move it much, it still says 0.30. Let's go true size again. Okay, this is sticking over here. I'm going to pan over. I'm looking at my seam line. I'm looking at my pattern. Okay, you can see there the seam obviously goes up a little bit, but it doesn't worry me too much. It's still pretty good. That's the middle. Let's go to the other end. Okay, you can see there's a bit of a gap there. That means I can move the whole pattern across. So I'm going to touch move, and I'm going to use my right facing arrow. Just tap it over till it touches that line. Okay, now I'm going to pan back to the other end. Okay, that's just about on the line. That's good. Let's just move it one more notch. Okay, I think that's good. Let's go. This is true size, so that's good. So this is the actual size it's going to be when it's stitched. And I'm just again looking at this space. I think I like that. I'm going to leave it like that. Let's go zoom full. Well, we'll zoom in to our border. Okay, let's pan that way. Let's pan this way. Okay, that looks good. Let's go out a bit. So having set that in place, a little bit of fiddling to get it right. It's pretty straight. The first border you do is usually the straightest because there's no quilting there to alter the fabric at all. So this one has needed the least amount of modification, probably. So we're now ready to sew. So I'm going to hit finished, finished, sew quilt. Now remember again, it's going to sew out from the middle and out from the middle. If I started at this side and stitched all the way across there, the fabric's going to gradually be sucked up and it may not look nice at this end. So that's why I'm starting in the middle and going out. On this small quilt, the movement may not be too much, but on large quilts it is. So I recommend starting in the middle. So it says select the first pattern to quilt. I'm going to stitch out to the left first, continue, select the next pattern to quilt, this one. Now notice we've got a big pink line because of course this pattern ends here and the next one starts here. So I'm going to hit continue, and now I get to choose what IQ is going to do from the end of that pattern to the start of that one, and I'm going to have it stop to cut threads. Okay? I don't want it to stitch continuously, I don't want a great big jump stitch. Stop to cut threads. So now we're ready to sew. So we'll go sew quilt. IQ is moving to the starting point. Does its initial stitch. I'm bringing up the bobbin thread. Please set the regulated stitch length for constant speed. Well, I'm going to set my constant speed. And I'm going to set this down to, let's try that. Okay, now if you usually do little tie-off stitches at this point, go ahead and do it. Use your single stitch button, however you usually tie off. I nearly always bury my threads, so I'm just holding my thread tails and I'm going to start it sewing. Now I'm going to pay attention to the stitch length as it stitches because I may want to speed up my machine slightly to get a shorter stitch length. We'll see how it goes. I do. Pause it because I can see my machine shaking around a bit, so I'm going to just slow it down a little bit more, and I will speed I'll speed this up a bit. Okay. Big stitches. Okay, I'm going to watch as it stitches. And on the first repeat there was a gap, and I want to address that if it does it again. Okay, pause. Right here. There's a gap, and I think if I look up at my screen, you will see I have dwell turned off. I'm going to try with dwell on 1. That'll make IQ pause momentarily at that point, and it may close it up. Also, my tension isn't the best. I really don't care at this point because this is just a project. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. It's all a question of playing around. Normally, if this was a real quilt, I would have stopped much sooner, adjusted my tensions a bit, and maybe played around with a bit more with the stitch length. But we'll carry on as we are. So just go start. If you don't like IQ to move this fast, set IQ to the speed you're comfortable with. I know lots of people like it to run more slowly. I like to make it go as fast as I can without distorting the pattern too much. Or I should say without distorting the pattern at all. Okay, let's see if dwell 1, setting this to dwell 1 and close up that gap. A little bit better. Not an absolutely perfect match-up. That's mostly due to the fabric shifting. Maybe slowing down IQ would make that match up better. And you can try all those different things. If you don't like the result of one, repeat, pause IQ, change the speed, slow it down, turn on dwell, and see if that improves the pattern for you. Okay, we've got to the end of that one. IQ's beeping at me because it's remembering I told it I wanted to cut the threads. So I will pull through, pull up my bobbin thread and cut that. Just shift the middle threads out of the way and just tell it to start, and it will move right to the middle. Okay, now before I touch start, can you just zoom in on this, Tony? Right here. You can see it should be starting right where the other one did, but the quilt has moved slightly. I don't like that big gap. I paused IQ, so now I am going to realign. So up to the screen, I'm touching realign here. It says touch a reference point on the screen. I am touching the middle, the start point. Continue. Move the needle to the location of the reference point, which will be right here. And I'm going to lower my needle so I can really see. I'm touching where the other pattern started. Okay. It's done the one stitch to bring up the bobbin thread. I'm holding the thread tails and I'll tell it to start. My quilt seems to be bouncing around normally more than it usually does, so I'm just holding it to make it less bouncy. I'm also using a very high contrast thread so that you can see the stitching well. Now normally when I do stitching like this, I've got my needle, I'm threading it and I'm stitching in my thread tail. My eye on the stitching though, in case something unusual happens, so I'm ready to stop it if I see something happening that I don't want to happen. It seems to be going on quite well. One more repeat after this. I like the distance it's stitched from the seam line. and it left me a good space at the top, so I've got lots of room for my lining. Okay, my threads, and then there are a couple of things I just want to point out on the screen, on the settings. Got that thread, okay. On the screen here, if I go back to the Sew Quilt page, and we'll just go Sew Quilt. The machine will move, but I'll stop it right away. Okay, restart. Okay, we're not going to. Let's. I need to see the picture. Okay, let's do it there. All right, that's good, Helen. Good. All right, got where I wanted. I just want to point out what settings can make a difference. If we look here, it says the remaining length of my pattern, which is just the end part there, is it's going to take 1 minute to sew that. Right, I'm going to put dwell to 2. See how it's increased the time? If I put it to dwell 3, it's increased the time again. If I go dwell off, it's reduced the time. So if you have a pattern with a lot of changes in direction, a lot of dwell points, having dwell to 1, 2 or 3 is going to increase your stitching time quite noticeably. More so than changing the speed and details. Also, I don't know if it was apparent in the video, but when IQ was stitching this little curl, it seemed to hesitate, which was telling me there were a lot of dwell points there. So I'm going to turn the dwell to 1, which lets me activate this button, which says high DP. DP is dwell points. I'm going to turn it on so you can see the dwell points. All those little red dots, and we'll zoom in, are places where IQ is going to dwell, which is exactly what it was doing. You could see it really slowing down as it came through here because there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dwell points there, and I had dwell to 1, so it was pausing momentarily at every dwell point. Of course, when you turn the dwell off, those disappear. Let's zoom out so we can see the others. The others all come where you expect them, at points, at sharp changes in direction. These are kind of unexpected. Knowing that with this pattern, I may go into that pattern, bring it into a block, and just smooth it by 1%, and that will get rid of all those little dwell points. It won't get rid of these, but it will get rid of those, which will make it stitch much more smoothly in the future. So that's something to pay attention to. Okay, let's get back to our quilt. So we're done with the border pattern. Do you want to save the current needle position? No, because I'm just playing around. Back out. Okay, we've stitched this. We've stitched the top border. We've stitched the top pattern. So I can delete those, both of those right now if I want to. I'm just going to delete the pattern. Delete the feather patterns. Do not touch select all, because if you do, and let's go zoom full, you've got all these patterns over here and they'll disappear if you touch select all. So don't do that. We'll zoom in here. I'm just going to touch this and this. Continue. Yes. I'm going to leave the block because now I'm going to trace the sashing block, and leaving that will show you how the fabric has moved, how the quilt has moved. Before I do that, I just want to point out down here on the quilt, please, Tony. At the cornerstones, I have marked a little X. That's the middle of the cornerstone. And I'm going to use that as I mark the block, because I know the patterns in the sashing need to meet in the centre of the cornerstone. So that's why I've marked it. And all I did was I laid my ruler that way, made a chalk mark, laid it that way, made a chalk mark, and now I know where the centre of the sashing cornerstone is. Okay? Alright, so we're finished deleting our pattern. So I'll touch finished. Add edit block. add block, standard block, mark on quilt. Disengage the motors again. Okay, and I'm going to go over here. Move the needle to the first point. My first point is going to be the middle, the center of that left-hand side cornerstone. Okay? Touch OK. Now I'm going out to the seam line between the border and the sashing. And again, I'm going to mark a point any place I think that seam line curves or isn't absolutely straight, and it isn't. My piecing, but still. Okay, now I'm going to come to the center of this cornerstone, out to the edge, and I'll probably go in front of the camera at some point, along, along, along. Okay, into the center of the cornerstone, out, scoot across the front. Into the center. Okay, now back along between the block and the sashing. I'll try and keep out of the way. Now I'm marking a lot of points because I can see this seam is not perfectly straight. Now I'm just going to go straight across here. I don't need to go back to the center because I've already marked that one time. Let's look this side. Ooh, there's a bit of a bend there. Let's do this. Now I know my sashing pattern doesn't come right out to the edge of the sashing, so there's a bit of leeway. And I'm going to end in the center of this cornerstone where I began. Finished. No, I don't tighten up the block. Okay, I'm just going to come this way. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see. The original border block is the black one. The one I've just marked is red, and you can see there's a difference there. Let's go true size. That's simply because the quilt has now moved. That quilting in the border sucked up the fabric, so the seam line has moved up. So don't worry about that. Now I'm going to delete that border block. Things will not line up on the screen. Once you've stitched something, the fabric moves, it's not going to look pretty. So this is another reason to keep your plan off to the side and delete things as you go. Then it doesn't bother you, because that might be bothersome. You think, why is that happening? Don't worry, it's just the way it is. So we're going to go add edit block, delete block, and I'm going to delete the border block. Done. So now all we've got is the sashing block. So let's zoom out. So now I'm going to pan over to my plan, and I am going to copy this first row of sashing. So I've finished add editing my block. Add edit pattern, copy pattern, and I'm going to copy the lob patterns. 6 of them. Okay, continue. There's my copies off to the side. Let's pan over. And we will turn zoom off, and we'll move the copies over here. And I will pan over some more. Turn zoom off. And I will put my copies down here. Now I'm going to zoom into true size. Pan. That looks good. That's matched the centre of that cornerstone. I'm going to pan over. Oh, look at that. That's pretty darn good. That's actually the intersection of the areas coming to the centre of my cornerstone. I like that. That's good. Coming over to this one. Now this one's way off. You can see how the block is there and the sashing is here. So I am going to zoom out a little bit. And I'm just going to touch the select button. select the patterns to modify. I am going to just modify this pattern and this pattern for now. So I'm going to touch this one. Oh no, let me go back. Finished. Modify pattern. Okay. This one and this one. I should have touched two. I only touched one before I touched finish. So continue. Alright. Stretch. I'm going to use stretch. Touch the anchor point. This one is good. Now I'm going to zoom in and I'm grabbing the other end and I'm snapping it to that intersection. Okay, let's zoom out again. Alright, that looks good. Now when you use stretch, it alters the scale of the whole pattern. So if you're stretching it a long way or outwards or inwards, it's going to change the whole scale of the pattern. I only moved that very little. So even though these two copies have changed in scale, it's not enough to see any difference between the others. So that's why I use stretch there. Okay, let's go pan across. So now I'll go select, touch these two. Let's zoom in. I need to move this so it snaps there. And I'm going to use stretch again. Touch that anchor point. Let's pan over to the other end. And we'll snap this to there. Okay, let's pan over and have a look. Now, I can see that this point is fractionally closer to the seam line than that one. I'm not worrying about it. It looks good. Look at that wonderful seam. Not straight at all. Doesn't matter. This pattern doesn't touch the seam lines. So I'm just looking to see that it's not horribly off. Okay, I think I'm going to adjust this first one too. Okay, so I'm going to go, let's zoom out first. Okay, select this one and this one. Continue. And I'm going to use stretch, so anchor that. We'll pan over. And I'm going to zoom in here. And I'm going to bring this to here, which now I can see this one is not correct, so let's go zoom out. Page to zoom in, so we'll go select. We'll just select this one, I think. Stretch, anchor that, zoom into here, bring that one down, that's better. Okay. Okay, pan, get them all in, out. There. So there's my sashing, alright? Again, like the border, I'm going to stitch from the centre out. Centre out. Okay? So I'm going to go finished. Finished. Sew quilt. Select the first pattern to quilt. I'm going to select this one as my first pattern to quilt. And I can immediately see that it starts on the left and ends on the right. I want that the other way around. So I'm going to go swap start endpoints. Alright? Continue. Select the next pattern to quilt. This one. Again, I need to swap the start endpoints. Continue. Select the next pattern to quilt. This one. Again, swap start endpoints. Continue. Select the next pattern to quilt. It'll be this one. Continue. It starts in the centre and stitches out to the right, so that's okay. I don't need to swap the start endpoints there. Continue. But I've got this big pink line. Stop to cut threads just like we did for the border. Select the next pattern to quilt. This one. Continue. Select the next pattern to quilt. This one. Continue. Sew quilt. Moving to the centre. One stitch. Hold my threads. And we'll see how this goes. doing this double stitching right on top of that other line. Out to my corner. Start to cut threads. Cut that thread. Okay. I'm remembering how on the big border we had to realign, so I'm just going to hit realign right away here. You come up to the screen, you can see the button there. Realign. Okay. Touch a reference point on the screen. I'm just going to zoom out so I can. No, zoom in, Helen. Okay, this is my reference point. Continue. Now I'm going to move my machine to that point, lower my needle so I can see that I'm spot on. Yep, lift it up. Okay. Does the stitch to start, and now it'll stitch the other side. Now I'm going to watch when it does the double stitch, and if I think it's not going to hit, then you can just press down on your quilt a little bit just to shift the fabric over. It didn't hit there because I was pushing here. So there's the sashing. Now this isn't perfect, don't worry if yours isn't, it's only a project, we're discovering things with this. I know I've moved my machine slightly since I used it last, which I think is part of the shaking. So before we do the next part, I'm going to play around with my speeds a bit, and set it, because these stitches are a little bit big for me, for my taste right now. But there we are, so we've done the first border and the first sashing, and I think that's enough for this class. So have fun stitching that out. Or, oh, let me just add, if you are, if you can't keep this on your machine for these several weeks when we're stitching, then go ahead and baste the whole thing so you can take it off and put it back on. Okay, I'm just leaving mine on. Okay, thank you. Have fun.